So here's a fun fact. You probably only eat bacon for breakfast thanks to Sigmund Freud, which is strange given he's probably better known for his work on the sausage. So today, most people are obsessed with bacon as a breakfast food, and you'd be hard pushed to find a single restaurant that doesn't have a breakfast offering that includes bacon in some form. But it wasn't always that way. For most Americans before the 1900s, bacon was primarily a dinner food, and the main reason that we now think of it as a breakfast food goes back to a masterpiece of manipulative psychology from Sigmund Freud's nephew. So while I unpack the surprising history of how bacon became a breakfast food, I'm going to make my own bacon. So to start the long journey to home-cured bacon, I'm starting with a 2-kilo pork belly. Set about removing the rind with a sharp knife. I ended up making some pretty tasty pork scratchings with that later, so quiz in. Once done, I'm setting aside the pork belly to make my curing mix. Into a bowl, I'm putting 250 grams of salt, the same amount of brown sugar, and a few cracks of black pepper. Stir the mix together, then put your pork belly into a tray and cover it liberally with the salt, pepper, and sugar mix. Next up, I need to put it into an airtight container so it can cure over the next week. And this just gives me an excuse to dig out the vacuum sealer that I impulse bought years ago when I was absolutely convinced that I was suddenly going to start sous videing everything in sight. The bacon in training is too big for my bags, so we're going to have to divide and conquer. Place the pork belly in the bag, sprinkle in some more of the cure mix, and try to get an even coating around the pork. Now it's time to stare into the vacuum. Rinse and repeat with the other pork joint before putting them both in the fridge, where they'll spend the next 7 days slowly curing and being flipped once a day for evenness. So as I said earlier, bacon never used to be a breakfast food for most Americans. And the story of how it became one is honestly one of my favorite stories ever from history. In the 1900s, for most Americans, breakfast was a slice of dry toast or a coffee or something that you could take as you're rushing out the door on your way to chase down that good old American dream. But all that changed thanks to a man called Edward Bernays. Bernays has been described as the father of modern public relations. He even allegedly coined the term public relations, because at the time, all there was to describe systems of mass influencing was propaganda. And Bernays kind of felt that the Nazis had given propaganda an image problem, so he rebranded propaganda into a new system of mass influencing which lent heavily on the teachings of his uncle, Sigmund Freud. He interpreted Freud's work as essentially proof that we are all essentially sheep, making predictable choices so that we feel safe and fit in with the herd. And he spent his life crafting these intricate publicity stunts born of Freud's teachings, all in the bid to sell the products of whoever was paying him. And he was really good at it. For example, in the 1920s, the Beech-Nut Packing Company paid Bernays to increase their sales of bacon. So Bernays essentially created a publicity campaign to try and change the perception of bacon as a breakfast food so people would eat it more of the day around. And he essentially did this by paying a doctor to say that heartier breakfasts, such as those made with bacon, were good for you. He then sent that medical recommendation out to 5,000 other doctors to see if they agree. And the vast majority followed that herd mentality that Bernays loved so much and did agree. And before you know it, Bernays is dominating the news cycle with stories about how Americans lead healthier lives by having heartier breakfasts made from bacon. The last time I was in America, I went to a pharmacy and saw a tube of bacon-flavored toothpaste on sale. To this day, I'm still not entirely sure if it was legit, if it was a joke, I don't know, but for me, that is pretty much proof of Bernays' lasting legacy for bacon. So when your pork belly is finished its 7-day stint in the fridge, all that sugar and salt has turned into a liquid brine that you need to pour out, wash off, and then pat dry. Personally, I feel that unsmoked bacon is essentially pointless, so I really want to find a way to smoke this. And because I'm a man in his mid-30s, I ended up buying an outdoor smoker earlier this year. I've got some apple wood pellets because I'm lazy and I don't really want to have to work at burning down coals. Nah, not for me. So I'm preheating my smoker to about 80 degrees and putting the pork belly in. I don't really want to cook the bacon, I'm looking for a cold smoke here. So I'm also putting in a tinfoil pouch of ice just to make sure that the ambient temperature doesn't get too high for the pork. So that'll stay in the smoker for 2, maybe 3 hours until it reaches 66 degrees. This honestly smells so incredible, but I'm gonna leave it to cool, vacuum seal it because I've rediscovered the machine, and put in the fridge overnight to make for easier slicing. So although this is an episode about why Americans eat bacon for breakfast, I really don't know any way for bacon to be a breakfast food that isn't in a full English breakfast. So that's what I'm gonna make. So the English fry-up is something you eat when you have no plans other than rolling between your sofa and your toilet for the foreseeable future. And its history goes back centuries. In the Middle Ages, breakfast wasn't common because the Catholic Church viewed it as gluttonous and sinful. Usually it would be only the elderly, the sick, children or labourers who would get breakfast because they needed the extra calorie boost to get them through to lunchtime. Eating in the mornings didn't become a regular habit until the 1600s, when more people started getting daily jobs. And even then it would be a long time until certain foods became viewed specifically as breakfast foods. It all started to come together in the 14th and 15th centuries. And it was from here the idea of certain specific breakfast foods really began to take hold. Eggs, for example. Eggs are freshly laid and collected in the morning, so it's the best time of day to eat them. Meats like bacon and sausage were cured so that people didn't have to get up and freshly slaughter a cow before breakfast. And then by the Edwardian era, the idea of the English breakfast as we know it really began to spread beyond the wealthy classes. As changes to mass production, agriculture, transportation all started to make things a lot more affordable and accessible for the everyman. Although there are some fundamentals behind a full English breakfast, everyone kind of has their own interpretation of what should be in the mix. So I'm just going to make the version I would on a lazy Sunday. So now we've got our bacon, it's time to cook it. Oh, look at that. I'm making the most of slicing off the block so I get some really nice, thick, chunky slices of bacon. So I'm laying them down on a parchment-lined baking sheet and then basically sandwiching it between another line of parchment and another baking sheet to weigh it down. This should get me the most even and consistent form of cooking without some bits drying out and some bits not rendering properly. And as the oven's on, I'm going to throw in some lovely English bangers and a couple of tomatoes. I'm also chopping up some chestnut mushrooms and sauteing them in a little bit of butter. And then right at the end, dousing them in a splash of balsamic vinegar once they've rendered out all their water. Then before plating up, I'm frying a couple of eggs, seasoning with pepper. So time to plate up. I'm putting on my tomato, my egg, my mushrooms, my sausage, my bacon, my black pudding, and arguably the most consistent feature of most fry-ups, baked beans. There is nothing quite like trying a full English fry-up at nearly 10 o'clock at night. I'm really hoping that this bacon has paid off because this has been a long time in the building up. I mean, my bacon has turned out amazingly, so really excited to see what this tastes like. I did a thing! I made bacon! Okay, so the flaws of homemade bacon. It's a lot saltier than most pre-made bacons I would buy, but it's also got a lot of sweetness from that sugar in the cure mix, which has really come through. And it is just so nice to have really thick slices of bacon. Any complaints I have about the bacon being salty is thankfully solved by the presence of tomato ketchup, which will always be a necessity on any English fry-up too. I think I need to stick this in the fridge for tomorrow morning.